I found out my brother had been stealing from our company for 19 months on the same evening. I was supposed to stand in front of 60 people and celebrate the woman I was going to marry. My mother called it a family matter. 4 years later, she called me in tears, asking me to come home because everything had fallen apart. I told her I was already home. Then I hung up. Let me start from that Tuesday afternoon in Edmonton. My name is Nash Calloway. I was 33. I had been running a renovation and general contracting company, Calloway Build, for 5 years. Residential and light commercial, kitchen overhauls, basement suites, structural additions across the greater Edmonton area. By the time I'm describing, we had 4 full-time employees, 2 trucks, and a reputation solid enough that we stayed booked 12 weeks out without advertising. My brother was 29, 4 years younger. He came on as a partner 2 years earlier. When I needed someone to manage the office side while I ran sites. Equals will split. 50-50. I offered it to him because I trusted him and because I was proud that we were building something together. He was good with clients. Organized. Personable. The kind of person who makes a room comfortable just by walking into it. My fiancée was Maeve Connolly. We had been together 3 years, engaged for 8 months. The engagement party was that Tuesday evening. 60 guests. A private dining room at a restaurant on 124th Street. I had put a $400 deposit on the room 3 weeks earlier. The company accountant, Sylvia, called me at 4:15 in the afternoon. She said she had been doing the quarterly HST reconciliation and found something she needed to walk me through before she filed. I was already in my truck, heading home to get changed. I pulled over on 104th Avenue. She said the client entertainment account had patterns she couldn't make sense of. Charges flagged as vendor meals or site-related travel that didn't match any active project files. Several of them fell on weekends or evenings when we had no sites running. She said, I'm probably missing something, but I wanted to flag it before I filed anything. I said, how much? She said, across the last 19 months, I'm looking at approximately $94,000. I sat in my truck without speaking for about 45 seconds. Then I said, I'll be at the office in 20 minutes. I was there in 12. $94,000. I went through the expense logs line by line, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, a weekend at Jasper Park Lodge in January, the week my brother had told me he was visiting our parents in Leduc, spa treatments billed under client hospitality, one charge for $640, at a jewelry boutique on White Avenue. I did not need to look long. He had uploaded receipts for most of the claims. Sylvia had drilled that habit into both of us for CRA compliance. One of the attachments was the wrong file. It was a photograph. My brother. Maeve, a restaurant I didn't recognize. Candlelight, her hand on his forearm. His eyes on her face in a way I had believed only I got to look at her. I closed the laptop. I sat at my own desk, in the company I had built, for about 3 minutes. Not thinking, not feeling. Just sitting the way you sit when the floor drops out, and you have not yet started to fall. Then I stood up. I opened the filing cabinet. I took out the original partnership agreement. The one we had both signed at the lawyer's office 2 years ago. The one I had a framed copy of hanging on the wall because I was that proud. I folded it, put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I drove to the restaurant on 124th Street. The party had already started. The room was full. My parents were there. Our cousins. Maeve's family, friends from trades in the neighborhood. Someone had put up a sign. There were photos of Maeve and me on a corkboard by the entrance. Flowers. Someone had opened wine. My brother was at the center of the room. He had a glass raised. I stood at the door and watched him give the toast. He said I was the hardest working person he had ever known. He said I had given him a chance when I didn't have to. And that fixiat me was the greatest honor of his life. He said Maeve was getting a man who would never let her down. He said he was proud of everything we had built together. I waited until he finished. Then I walked to him through the room. He saw me coming. Something moved across his face, just for a second. Then he smiled. I reached into my jacket. I set the partnership agreement on the table in front of him, folded, no words. I turned around and walked out. I got to the street before my legs felt like mine again. I walked 3 blocks to my truck, sat in it. The city was doing what Edmonton does in September. Cooling fast once the sun drops, the prairies reminding you that summer was always borrowed time. My phone started lighting up within minutes. Maeve, then my brother, then my mother, then my father. I turned off the screen and drove to a Marriott off the Henday. Paid cash for the room. Sat on the edge of the bed for a while and then called the only person who had sent me something different from everyone else. My friend Brody. We had known each other since grade 9 in Leduc. His text just said, "Tell me where you are." He arrived 40 minutes later. Came in, looked at the room, looked at me, and sat in the chair by the window without saying anything for a moment. Then he said, "How long?" I said 19 months of billing. The photos go back at least 6. He said, "The money and her." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you need?" Not what happened. Not calm down. Not are you sure. What do you need? That is the only question that matters when someone's world is on fire. I have thought about that question a lot over the last 4 years, and I am convinced it is the single most important thing you can ask another person in a crisis. I said, "I need to get out of Edmonton." He said, "For how long?" I said, "Long enough." By 10 o'clock I had 42 notifications on my phone. I opened one text from my mother, sent at 8:47. She said, "Nash, please don't do anything rash. Jared told us what happened. He says it's complicated. You can't destroy the business over a misunderstanding. We need to talk about this as a family before you do anything that can't be undone." A misunderstanding. I had a photograph on my laptop and 19 months of expense receipts. My mother read that as a misunderstanding. I opened one from my father, sent at 9:15. He said my brother was devastated. He said these things were more complicated than they looked. He said the company was too important to throw away over one mistake. One mistake. I turned off my phone. I did not sleep much. Wednesday morning I called Sylvia. I told her to freeze the company accounts and document everything. She had already started. She said, "I'm sorry, Nash. I should have caught it sooner." I said, "You caught it when it could still matter. That's enough." Wednesday afternoon I called a business dispute lawyer named Andrea. I told her I was dissolving a partnership and needed to know where I stood on the Stolson funds. She said, "We can pursue civil action once the documentation is in order. It's a strong case." I said, "What can I walk away with cleanly and quickly?" She told me the company name, the client list and a formal debt owing for the fraudulent withdrawals. I told her to start the paperwork. She had the dissolution filed by Friday. The following Thursday I loaded my truck. Everything I owned fit in the bed and the back seat. Tools, laptop, work boots, a box of documents, a duffel bag of clothes. And one thing I had not planned on taking. A 2-foot level hanging on the office wall that had belonged to my grandfather, George Calloway, a Finnish carpenter in Leduc for 30 years. He had given it to me the year before he died. When I told him I was going into the trades, he said, "If the bubbles center you're straight. Everything else can be fixed." I took it off the wall. I left everything else. I drove the Trans-Canada West out of Edmonton on a Thursday in October. 1,200 kilometers to the BC Ferries terminal at Sauvason. One stop at a Tim Hortons in Kamloops. I sat in the parking lot and ate a breakfast sandwich in the dark, and tried to remember what normal had felt like. I did not tell my parents. I was leaving the province. Victoria in October is gray and wet, and nothing like Alberta. The light is different. The air smells like salt and Douglas fir. I'm Burnside. $620 a month. Shared kitchen, 2 other guys who didn't ask questions. That was exactly what I needed. First month, I took subcontract work through a local general contractor at $60 an hour. I did not care that it was below what I had been managing. I needed to work with my hands because my brain was not reliable yet. Month 2, I registered a new sole proprietorship with BC Registry. Calloway Contracting. I started calling former Edmonton clients who had moved to the island. 3 of them had referral networks in Victoria. By month 3 I had 4 concurrent kitchen projects. Meanwhile Brody kept me informed. Not because I asked him to, I asked him not to at first. But he said, "You need to know what's happening. Ignorance isn't peace, it's just delayed shock." He was right. So I let him talk. Month 2. Your brother is running what's left of the company under a different name. He told clients you had a falling out over company direction. He poached 2 of your 4 employees. Month 4. Maeve moved in with him. Your parents had them over for dinner last Sunday. Your mom posted a photo. Your chair is still at the table. My chair. In my parents' kitchen, my mother hadn't removed it. She had just put other people around it and called it a table. Month 7. He took a loan from your parents, $45,000. Your dad co-signed. My father had spent 30 years driving a service truck for an oil field equipment company in Nisku. Saving carefully, planning for a retirement that now had a $45,000 hole in it. Because my brother needed money. Again. Still. I put my phone down and walked along the gorge waterway, until my legs were tired. I did not pick the phone up again until the next morning. Month 9. This was the message I was not ready for. Brody texted. He registered the new company name with Alberta Registries. He called it Calloway and Son Contracting. He used your grandfather's name in the branding. George Calloway. And Nash. Your grandfather's photo. The one you left on the office wall. It's on the website. I read that text sitting on a curb outside a job site in Saanich. My grandfather's name. His photo. The old black and white one of him in his carpenter's apron that I had framed and hung up the week I opened the business was now on the website of a company built with money stolen from me. My brother had taken the man I was named after, the man who gave me the level I drove 1,200 kilometers with, and put him on a logo. I put the phone in my pocket. I went inside and finished the trim work I was in the middle of. I kept my hands moving, because my hands were the one part of me still working correctly. In Victoria, things were building. By year 2 I had incorporated properly, and brought on a first employee, a young carpenter everyone on sites called Voss, 24 years old and meticulous. Revenue that year came in at $480,000. I opened an RRSP for the first time in my life and promised myself I would never touch it. Back in Alberta, Brody's updates came in like weather reports from a coast I could no longer see. Year 2, my brother's company was struggling. Maeve had left him. She moved back to her parents' place in St. Albert. It had lasted about 14 months, the affair that ended my engagement. The exciting option always has an expiry date. I wasn't surprised. I was also not the thing people expect. I was not relieved, not satisfied. I was tired, the kind of tired that is not about sleep. Then Brody told me the detail that put me on that park bench in Beacon Hill for an hour. My brother and Maeve had gotten engaged before she left him. They had booked their engagement party at the same restaurant, on 124th Street. The same private dining room where my party had been. The room I had paid a $400 deposit on and walked away from. They celebrated their engagement in that room. I did not say anything to Brody when he told me that. I sat on a bench in Beacon Hill Park and watched the peacocks, and felt something that did not have a clean name. Year 3. Revenue was $820,000. I bought a townhouse in Saanich, $460,000, $80,000 down, 15-year mortgage. The first week I owned it, I hung my grandfather's level above the kitchen door frame. Bubbled dead center. In Alberta, my brother's company folded after 22 months. He owed 2 suppliers a combined $68,000. My parents paid it down using a HELOC. They took against the house they had lived in for 29 years. My father also pulled from his RRSP, a penalty withdrawal, which meant CRA took 30% off the top before it got to him. The amount lost, $52,000. Retirement savings, built over decades, gone in one transaction. For a company that lasted less than 2 years. Year 4. I met Isla at a Habitat for Humanity build in Langford. She was on the framing crew. She knew what she was doing. Measuring twice, moving deliberately, the way people who have actually built things work. We talked through most of the lunch break and then she said, "Are you going to ask for my number, or are you going to wait for the next build?" I asked for her number. On our 3rd date she asked me who I was, not what I did. Nobody had asked me that in a long time. I told her everything. The accountant's call, the photograph, the toast, the partnership agreement I had folded and placed on the table, the drive west, all of it. She listened without cutting in. When I finished she said, "You kept the evidence in your jacket pocket, and still waited for him to finish the toast, before you left. That is either the most controlled thing I have ever heard, or the saddest." I said, "Both." She said, "What do you want now?" I said, "To build something nobody can take." She said, "Then keep building. I'll be here." While I was building with Isla, my brother had moved back into my parents' house, contributing $400 a month, spending the rest on his own expenses. My parents were on a fixed income. My father's pension, my mother's part-time work at a dental office in Leduc. Their HELOC payments were over $1,200 a month. The RRSP was gone. And Brody told me in year 4 that they had received a notice from their lender. 3 payments behind. Then Maeve had a baby, a girl. She named her Georgia. My grandfather's name was George. Brody told me that on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I was doing a site walkthrough in Colwood. I read it, put the phone in my pocket, and finished the walkthrough. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 20 minutes, and looked at the middle distance. Maeve had known about my grandfather from 3 years together. She knew what George Calloway meant to me. She had heard the stories. She had seen the level on the office wall, before I took it down. She gave the baby my grandfather's name. You can carry a hurt a long time. Before you realize it still has weight. 3 weeks after Brody's message, my mother called. I saw the number and let it ring once. Then I answered. She was crying before she said hello. She said, "Nash, please don't hang up." I said, "Talk." She said, "We're losing the house. Your father's health isn't good. Jared is here but he can't. The payments are more than we can cover. We've had a notice filed. I don't know what to do. We need you." I said, "I know." Silence. I said, "Brody tells me everything, the $45,000 loan, the HELOC, Dad's RRSP. I have known about every dollar for 4 years." She said, "Then you know how bad it is." I said. I know exactly how bad it is. I also know that you had a choice 4 years ago. You called it a misunderstanding. You hosted my brother for Sunday dinners. You co-signed his loan. You funded his company, the one he named after your father, after building it with money he stole from me. She said we made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But you were always the one who fixed things. We need you home. I said. I know I was the one who fixed things. And when it mattered most, you told me to keep quiet and handle it as a family. You chose the one who breaks over the one who builds them. And now the one who breaks things has broken you. She said, he's your brother. I said. He gave a toast about what an honor it was to stand beside me. Then he used my company's money for 19 months to fund a life he was hiding from me. He is not my brother. He is someone who shares a last name. She said, what about your father? He's 64 and he has nothing. I sat with that. The silence stretched longer than she expected. I said, Mom. 4 years ago I drove 1,200 kilometers to a city where nobody knew me. I had a pickup, a set of tools, and a level my grandfather gave me. I slept in a shared house with strangers and took labor work because I had to start somewhere. Nobody called to check on me. Nobody chose me. I chose myself, because you didn't, and now you're asking the son you let go to fix what the son you kept destroyed. She said, are you really going to let us lose the house? I said, sell it before the bank takes it. You'll have equity, move to something you can carry on your actual income. And tell your son to get a second job. That is what I did, 4 years ago when I had nothing. She said, Jared can't. I said, Jared is 33 years old. He has been living in your house contributing $400 a month while your savings ran out around him. That is not a crisis you created. That is the result of 4 years of protecting him from consequences. She was crying harder. I said, I don't say this to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and 4 years ago someone should have said it. And nobody did. She said, will you come home? I said, I am home. I hung up. She called back twice. I did not answer. My father called from a number I didn't recognize the next morning, and I picked up by accident. He said, Nash. I said, Dad. He said, I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did. I chose wrong for a long time, and I'm telling you that plainly. I chose wrong. But I'm asking you man to man. Help me figure out what to do. I said, Dad. You pulled $52,000 from your RRSP for a business my brother built with money he had stolen from me. You co-signed his loan after you knew what he had done. I was not part of those decisions. I am not part of the consequences. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, what do we do? I said, sell the house, rent something affordable, tell him he carries his own weight. Those are the same steps I took 4 years ago when I had nothing, and they worked. He said, will I hear from you again? The longest pause in this whole story. I said, I don't know, Dad. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure which of us ended the call. I just remember the lines going silent, and me sitting on my porch in Victoria, looking out at the water, feeling something I had not let myself feel in 4 years. Not anger, not satisfaction. Grief, the old quiet kind. The kind that lives in the space where a family used to be. The kind that does not go away just because the people who made it stopped deserving your grief. It sits there anyway, steady and cold, and reminds you that the wound was real, even when the people were not worth it. Isla came outside. She sat down beside me without asking what the call was. She just sat there. The way the right person does. When the wrong people have already taken everything they could take. After a while she said, you okay? I said, my father cried, first time I've heard that. She said, that's hard. I said, yeah. We sat there until the harbor lights came on. Across the water. The house sold 6 weeks later. Brody told me. After the mortgage and HELOC payoff, my parents walked away with $22,000. 29 years in that house. $22,000 left. Because everything else had gone into a company that lasted 22 months. Son, who was still in his 30s, behaving like the rules had never applied to him. They are renting now. A 2-bedroom in Leduc. $1,100 a month. My father's health is declining. My mother works 3 days a week. My brother has a studio in Edmonton, works warehouse shifts, sends a few hundred to Maeve for Georgia. The woman who was going to marry me is raising a daughter named after my grandfather in her parents' house in St. Albert. Working part-time, starting over the hard way. Same as my brother, same as every person in this story. Who chose the exciting option over the one that actually lasts. My company pulled in just over $1.1 million in revenue last year. 7 employees. A townhouse I own outright in 4 more years at my current pace. An RRSP I have never touched. A woman who knows how to frame a wall and asks good questions, and does not take anything that isn't hers. My grandfather's level is still on the wall above the kitchen doorframe. Bubble dead center. I look at it every morning. I kept the folded partnership agreement too. Not to revisit it. Not out of anger. I keep it because it is a record of the day I found out exactly who I was. A man who could walk out of his own engagement party in the middle of a toast without throwing a single. A man who could load a truck on a Thursday morning and drive 1,200 kilometers and build something real on the other side with no one's help and no one's blessing. My mother said everything fell apart. That is not what happened. Everything fell into place. It just took 4 years, 1,200 kilometers, and a level that still reads true. I was the son who showed up. The son who built things that lasted. The son who, when it finally mattered most, chose himself because no one else was going to. They found that out too late to do anything about it. But I found it out exactly when I needed to. Some things cannot be fixed. And the people who ask you to keep quiet about the things that broke you, they are not protecting the family. They are protecting themselves from the discomfort of having to choose right instead of easy. I chose right. I drove west until the mountains gave way to the ocean. And I built something on that shore that no one can fold and set on a table and walk away from. I have never been better.